Spuggins. It is I, Arth Blood, the girl next door. Hello, my Spuggins. It is I, Arth Blood, the girl next door. Your favorite girl fiend. And I thought, after talking about my favorite vampire movies and some vampire movies I really don't like so often, that I might talk about some of my favorite vampire books for a change. Well, sort of a change. If you've been following me for any length of time, if you followed my old written blog, Coffee and Casseroles, you know that I used to have a vampire book club. And so I've talked about vampire books on there before. But I haven't done one on here. So let's get started. And in no real particular order, I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. This is from the 1950s, and it has not only inspired the direction sci-fi kind of has gone. We have a bunch of movies based on this, from, of course, I Am Legend and The Omega Man and The Last Man on Earth, and there's been a couple other ones. George Romano has stated in an interview at one point that after he read this book, that's when he was inspired to create his Dawn of the Dead series. And when you think about that, okay, so for anyone who hasn't read this book or seen one of the movies, there's a worldwide plague, an apocalypse that just wipes out humanity. One man seems to be immune, and he's left trying to find a cure, trying to understand how this happened and why this happened. He also learns he's not the only human left, really. He's not the only earthling left on the planet. There's this group of vampires, and the book shows him fighting them off during the day with garlic and steaks and beheadings, and then at night hiding from them. It's hard to believe that this story, it is a short story, it's only about half the size of the book. It's hard to believe that this story from the 1950s has captivated so many people all these years later, that this book is still in print. And like I said, it's spawned so many movies, and being the inspiration for zombies as we know it. So if you've been following me, you know that I always continuously say we would not have zombie genre, the zombie genre as we know it, if it wasn't for vampires, and that zombies are just another subgenre of the vampire genre. All right, this comes as no surprise to anybody, but Bram Stoker's Dracula. Now, this is this copy does have the logo for the movie, but it is the original story written in the diary and letter entry formula. I also have a movie script version of this. It's got a different cover. And I have about 5 hardcover copies of the story. Usually most of my hard copies are anthology, so it's Dracula and other things. Okay, now we have a book from the early 90s, 1993 to be exact, and this one is dear to me because this is where I got my name. The Night Inside by Nancy Baker. And it's about this woman, Ardith, who gets kidnapped with the intent of being a victim for a vampire, but things don't quite go the way the kidnappers expected. And I read this when it first came out. It was my last year of high school, my first year of college. And I fell in love with it. It delves into the idea of who are we? Who are we to other people? Who are we to ourselves? Where do we find the balance between the person we try to be and the person we end up being? There's a lot of questions in the first half of the novel that the lead character is having over where does she fit in? And the fact then that it goes into a vampire metaphor is just brilliant. I understand that there's a couple of other books by this author. I believe there might be 2 others. I could be wrong. There might be more by now. But that she turned this into a franchise, a series of books. I've never been able to get my hands on any. So I can't tell you if there is, or if those were rumors, but I'm pretty sure there's 2 more in the series. They are thrillers. They are kind of detective leaning noir type stories. But yeah, when I first read this, I just fell in love with the character. And I was like, oh, that's where I got my name. That's where I got my name. Okay, also around the early 90s, I believe this one was 1994, I believe, yes, 1994, Shade by David Dark. I fell in love with this one because when it came out, and again, I read this my first year of college. When this one came out, the fandom around vampires was just really starting to hit that global peak. This is about it happens within about a week. The time frame is about a week, and it's about a convention, a fan convention. We follow some of the vampire fans, and we follow the author of their favorite vampire series, who, spoiler alert, is a vampire herself. And it's how she gets her victims that I thought was just so different at that time. I don't know if this book is still available. Actually, full honesty, half the books probably on this list probably aren't available anymore because they are from the early 90s. And I believe this was the only novel that this author wrote under this name. Back when, it wasn't always, it was kind of frowned upon for certain authors to do horror or horror slanted. So I do believe that Shade is the only novel under this author's name. I could be wrong, but when I was doing some research trying to find more novels by this particular author, nothing was coming up. I couldn't even find this. This didn't even come up. So I don't know. But they use the convention kind of as a metaphor for, like, the fandom, the convention kind of as a metaphor for vampirism itself, and how we as fans feed off of the work of our heroes and how our heroes kind of feed off of us. All right, jumping around here. I'm not a big true crime person. It's not really my thing, but in the early 1990s, there was a okay, how how to delicately put this. There was a cult of teenagers who believed themselves to be vampires, or at least one of them did. And that would be Rod Ferrell and his vampire clan. This is one take on that. This is the Vampire Killers. This true crime author, journalist, I think did a fairly decent job with the case file and talking about it respectfully. This one is from the late 1990s. I don't remember. There was 4 or 5 that I'm aware of, crime authors, true crime authors, true crime journalists who did cover this story. There was a documentary, and there was a actual movie. The can't remember what the name of the documentary was, but the movie was Vampire Clan. This one was from, I think, 1990. Vampires by John Stakely. Yes, this is the inspiration for the movie John Carpenter's Vampires. Again, I read this in the early 90s when I was still in high school. So when the movie version came out, I went to cinemas. I went and saw it in cinemas. I was blown away. This is the first time I had seen the real connection between Westerns and vampires. I know there was movies galore between the 70s and the early 90s that had vampire Westerns, but this was the first time I'd seen it in a book form. If you haven't seen this one, if you haven't read this one or seen the movie, it follows a group of vampire hunters as they try to kill a very, very powerful master vampire. Now, in the movie version, the character of Crow has a much different ending than he does in the book. And the vampire in the movie is a lot more interesting. The movie version of the vampire character is actually a lot more brutal. He's more intelligent. In this one, he comes across a little more like a whiny brat. But look at this cover. Isn't this the most gorgeous? How could you not see this on the shelf and not want to pick it up? Like, dude. Okay, then I have an anthology series here. This was the 1989 one. My favorite, Blood Is Not Enough. My favorite short story in this anthology is from 1949, and it's The Girl with the Hungry Eyes by Fritz Leiber. His name is actually on the cover, and I can't really pronounce that properly. I believe it's Lieber. But The Girl with the Hungry Eyes, the short story is about a photographer who ends up taking a series of photos of a vampire and kind of their interactions. There is a movie based on this short story. The movie has that plot line for maybe the first 5 minutes, and then it just becomes this odd love story, and there's a haunted hotel, and the vampire lives in the haunted hotel. But the metaphor, the movie version uses of the vampire being the hotel itself is brilliant. In the short story, the metaphor of fame kind of taking the life from someone, oh, hands down, brilliant. Okay, I grabbed book 2 of a series, Tanya Huff's Books of Blood, not to be confused with Clive Barker's. This particular one, this is volume 2, and it's from 1993. This is a detective story. This is about two detectives who end up getting a case that they find out was committed by a vampire, and they've got to track down who the vampire is. It was made into a short-lived TV series called Blood Ties. But yes, the lead character is like I said, it is a detective, and she's on the case of this what she thinks is a serial killer, and it ends up being a vampire. Next up, okay, what's the year on this one? The year 2004. Did I read it in 2004? I think I read it in 2010. But Let the Right One In. Now, I have to admit, I read this after I saw the movie. That's why I said I think I read it in 2010. This follows a young boy who finds out his neighbor is a kid who ends up being a vampire. And while this really innocent kind of romance starts between them, this friendship, her caretaker has become a serial killer for her. And if you've seen, there's two movie versions. There's Let the Right One In, and then there's the remake Let Me In. If you've seen those movies, you know the plot. I don't really want to say any more about this one, because this book is so intense. The gore is higher. The unsettlingness is higher. Like, it's very disturbing, but it's so good. The subject matter can get very, do I want to continue reading this type of thing? But it's worth sitting through that uncomfortableness, and that's a good thing. A vampire book, a horror story in general, if it's good, should be uncomfortable. You should not walk away feeling sparkly in the sunlight. Do you know what I mean? So if that's another thing. If you're kind of sick of those sparkly in the sunlight type of stories, this is definitely the opposite direction and where you should be looking. Speaking of, okay, so this is a English version. I don't know what the original print date. My copy happens to be 2006 because it's the English translation. There is a series, and I don't know where I put the rest of them. I only have about half the series anyway. There's 6 or 7 books in this series. Night Watch, and I'm sorry, I cannot say the author's name. I will butcher that horribly. But this is book 1 in a series, and I think I have up to part 4, and I believe there's up to 7 but I could be wrong. There could be more by this point. Okay, so this is a Russian story about a group of vampires and other supernatural characters. And we're following a vampire, kind of like a Men in Black situation, if you want to call it that. It's set in a very urban setting with our lead character. His job is to, there are light walkers and day walkers, night watch. The day keepers and the night keepers. I'm sorry. I know what I'm talking about. And they kind of keep the balance between the good creatures and the bad creatures, and there's like kind of a espionage spy thing happening. There's so much going on in this series, and like I said, this is only book one. I've only read book one so far, but they're called The Others. And so you have the dark and the light, two powerful forces that long ago forged an uneasy truce in order to avert chaos and disaster. And you're following this character, and he's very sympathetic, but some of the stuff he does, you're like, oh right, he's this really nasty vampire, double agent, spy kind of character. And there's werewolves, and there's general shapeshifters, and there's a witch, and there's this woman with telekinesis, and it just covers all the mythological monsters. And it's such a brilliant story. And like I said, it's part of a series, The Night Watch. I believe they're called the Day Watch, the Twilight Watch, and there's, like I said, I don't know where I put the rest of my half of the series. So I can't tell you the rest of the titles, but it's very different. And yes, there's actually two movies, The Night Watch and the Day Watch. They are both based on the first book, though. All right, moving on. Okay, this is my absolute favorite, and it's quite worn, quite loved, quite used. Anne Rice's The Vampire Lestat came out in 1985. 1985. I read this in 1985. I had gotten it from the library. It was the first book I was allowed to rent from the library without my mother's approval. So I had rented it in hardcover when it first came out. So I read this when I was 11 years old, and a lot of it went over my head, and that's okay because I was 11 years old. But it made me such an Anne Rice fan, and it made me I was a vampire fan from vampire movies, but as I said, it was the first vampire book I had ever read. And if you haven't read book 2 of The Vampire Chronicles by Anne Rice, you really should. It follows Lestat. He has been underground for a while, like literally sleeping in the ground for so many years, so many decades, and he wakes up just as Interview with the Vampire is being published, and he's like, no, here's what really happened. And so it's his story all the way up to, I think, 1983, where he's got his rock band, and they're about to do their first concert, and it ends on a cliffhanger. The book ends on a cliffhanger, and then the story picks up in Queen of the Damned, which is why if you've seen the movie Queen of the Damned, it's kind of choppy because it's half based on The Vampire Lestat and half based on Queen of the Damned book 3. But this book, oh my god, I picked this copy up in 1987 and I carried it around in my purse all through grade 8, all through grade 9, all through grade 10, all through grade 12, and all through my first year of college. So it's you know, very loved. And I got one more for you here. Oh well, I had to keep the list low. I've got plenty of other vampire books, but okay, so this is, I believe, 1993. I believe was the publishing date for this one. 1994, sorry. Ooh. The Vampire Book. This, by J. Jordan Melton, is an encyclopedia of vampires. An encyclopedia of vampire movies, of vampire books, of vampire actors, of vampire writers, of vampire comics up to that point, of the game Vampire Masquerade. There's stuff about Transylvania, there's stuff about Bram Stoker, and on and on and on. So before the internet became what it became, for any vampire fan, and I've got, this is the first edition here, and it's a little worse for wear. I've also got the second and third editions. But before the internet was what it was, what it's become, in the early 90s, if you were a vampire fan, this was your go-to. This was your Bible. You carried it, you read it, you studied it. And I don't think I would have learned of some of the movies that I learned about if it wasn't for this book. There is a section at the back of the book, and it's a vampire filmology broken down by decade up until this is why they've got, you know, second and third editions, because so many more movies came out, up until 1990, up until 1993, up until like right when it was published. And they break down in that section, they break down the movie by year, by title, the actor, the director, how long it is, what country it's from, what language it's in, the length. No, sorry, the length is not there. It's the year, the production company, the actors, the writer, the director, and a brief summary. Okay, this kind of ran a little longer than I expected, but I should have known that given it's my favorite topic on the planet. So that would be it for today, and I am going to tag Nerd Squish, the Cobwebs channel, Ben over at the Horror Zone, and Alt Knots. And I know Alt Knots has a book club, so I think she'll do good. So yeah, and if you want to tell me what some of your favorites are, tag your it. Leave them in the comments or make a video and let me know in the comments that you made a video. Okay, until next time, creeping screams.